welcome to our 14th annual Don Wasylenki Education Day. It's a pleasure to see so many of you joining us today for this conference for faculty who are interested in improving their knowledge and skills in teaching and education. For those I haven't had the pleasure to meet, I'm Shaheen Durrani. I'm the Director of Faculty Development and Mentorship within our Department of Psychiatry. So before the start of the event today, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So before I read it, please take a moment to situate yourself and think about the land under and around you. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which the sites of the Department of Psychiatry are located that precede the establishment of the University of Toronto. We acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, this land is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, and gather on these territories. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. There are few places on earth that someone before us has not called home. Don Wasylenki Education Day engages faculty, staff, and trainees in our department in further developing their knowledge and skills in education. Provides a chance for us to come together as a community to connect, to commiserate, to celebrate, and to learn from one another, exploring the future of education in our department and beyond. Don Wasylenki Education Day helps us improve our practice, share our expertise, and shape education in ways that will improve the experiences of our future learners and the patients and communities they care for. I want to take a moment to recognize the event's namesake. Dr. Donald Wasylenki is a professor emeritus in the department who served as chair as well as psychiatrist in chief at St. Michael's Hospital. Today's event carries his name in recognition of his advocacy and passion for education. We are honored to continue the legacy of education and innovation that he established in the Department of Psychiatry. So for today's agenda, we will start with our plenary talk, the Major General John Taylor Fotheringham Memorial Lecture. This year, we're very excited to welcome Dr. Emile Servan-Schreiber, a cognitive psychologist and pioneering entrepreneur in digital collective intelligence. Dr. Servan-Schreiber is a CEO and chief scientist of Hypermind, a company specializing in collective forecasting and digital platforms. He will speak about how diversity contributes to collective intelligence. Following our plenary, we will have a 15-minute break where we invite you to enjoy refreshments, coffee, tea, and connect with your colleagues. We will then come back together at 10:45 for our poster session, taking place outside the auditorium space as well as on the lower level in the basement, where you will have an opportunity to discover the research our colleagues are doing at the forefront of education scholarship. We have engaged, again, ePosters Live, an online platform that will allow you to easily search the content of the poster session via a QR code available in your packages. There's also a poster group schedule available in your packages, and there will be a poster awards ceremony that will take place after the poster session at 11:45 in this auditorium. So we ask that you come back here so that you can then hear about our poster awardees for the Best Faculty and Best Trainee Poster Awards. The lunch hour will offer an opportunity to learn from our experienced colleagues, department leaders at our Mentoring Career Development Lunch. We will then close the day with 2 workshops offered in partnership with the Center for Faculty Development. So for our poster awards presentation, we are delighted to offer 4 awards this year: the Best Faculty Poster Award, the Best Status-Only Faculty Poster Award, Best Trainee Poster Award, and new this year, an inaugural award, the People's Choice Best Poster Award, where you will have an opportunity to vote on your favorite poster via a QR code located on the poster schedule in your packages, as well as located at the poster boards. Just to share, this year we are also offering a career development mentoring lunch. This was offered for the first time last year and was such a success that we decided to offer it again. And this is an opportunity for attendees, our participants, all of you, to receive mentorship, words of wisdom from our senior leaders, education leaders, department leaders over lunch. And you can choose the topic and area in which you'd like to receive guidance and mentorship, such as finding your career path, how to turn my teaching activities into education scholarship, building and preparing your teaching portfolio, educational research projects and methods, starting a career in teaching and education, how to get promoted as a mid and junior career faculty, trainees, setting yourself up for success, and as well as CV consultation. So if you have your CV with you, we invite you to bring that to the lunch so you can get some feedback on how to put forward a strong CV. Following lunch, we will then have 2 workshops that will be offered concurrently, and this is being offered in partnership with the Center for Faculty Development. The first workshop is Generative AI, Principles and Applications for Teaching and Learning. The facilitators of this workshop will be building on the content of our plenary for this workshop, and that will take place on the lower level in room 408A. The other workshop, the second one, is Teaching Fundamentals in the Clinical Context, which will take place on that same level, lower level, in 408B. And I'd like to draw your attention to faculty development offerings, activities, events that are available to you to support your academic career success. So we do have our mentorship program. This program was launched, its inaugural program in our department in September of 2021. It's a comprehensive mentorship program that offers an online one-to-one mentor-mentee matching platform. And supplementing that are 7 peer mentorship communities of practice groups that align with faculty's academic role or social identity. And just to let you know about some upcoming events, so we do have our clinician teacher mentorship group, which will be offered on February 26th, virtually at lunchtime, and they will be covering the topic of how to navigate professionalism concerns with learners. We also have our 2S LGBTQ+ mentorship group, which will be offering an event on February 6th on the topic of how to support research career success. Please save the date for a physician faculty wellness event being offered by Dr. Mamta Gautam, who will be speaking about Fix the Workplace, Not the Workers, understanding and addressing key issues of equity and inclusion in the medical workplace. And then we also have our orientation for new faculty. This year, that will be offered on October 24th, 2025. Please save the date. This is a lovely event where we have an opportunity to welcome our new faculty to the department, provide words of wisdom, tips for success, orient them to the mentorship program, and also offer career development workshops. And then finally, we also have our STACER training, STACER examiner training, which is a self-directed, self-paced e-module course for faculty, and it's readily available on demand for faculty who are interested in having the training or perhaps want to refresh their training. And I just want to draw to your attention, so we do have a coffee and chat taking place today, right after Don Wasylenki Education Day. So this will be taking place at 2:30, hosted by our Racialized Women Mentorship Group. So please join us. It'll be hosted by Dr. Adriana Carvajal, who I see is here today in the room. And this is an opportunity to reflect on today's content, the offerings, connect with your colleagues, share experiences, and engage in some thoughtful discussions. So that will be taking place at Mofer's Coffee. If those of you are not familiar where that's located, it's just down the street on Queen Street, about 2 minutes from the conference. So in terms of housekeeping, in response to your feedback, we will be making available presentation materials from today's event, and that will be available via a ShareLink file. For the posters showcase, as mentioned, there is a schedule in your packages, as well as a QR code that can link you to the schedule, as well as e-posters online. In the support of continuously evaluating our offerings, please do consider completing an evaluation after today's events. We know what was helpful and how we can improve to better meet your needs. And then you will also receive CME letters of accreditation 2 to 3 weeks after the conference. So please do ensure that you've signed in at the registration desk, and you also sign in at the workshop you attend so that you can receive credit for your participation. So I'd just like to take a moment to offer my deepest appreciation to all those that contributed to the planning, delivery, coordination behind the scenes for today's event. Very grateful to our team, made up, I counted actually just before or last night, almost over 50 contributors. Thank you to my co-chairs, Jovana Martinovic, Branka Ajic, to our presenters, our planning committee, our partners at the CFD, our career development lunch mentors, poster assessors, Anne-Marie and our amazing administrative support team, Ben Gain for his efforts in promoting today's event, our e-posters team, Discovery Commons for their technological support. This day would not have come together without everyone's tireless efforts and valuable contributions. And please save the date for next year's Don Wasylenki Education Day, which will be offered on Thursday, February 19th, 2026. We hope to see you there. And I just do want to acknowledge and take this opportunity to thank all the resident learners here today as part of Resident Appreciation Week coming up on February 10th to 14th for your contributions to patient care, teaching, and research in our department. There are so many examples of our residents showing up for each other, for our faculty. I know your work can be difficult and at times feels as though it goes unnoticed. So as part of Resident Doctor Appreciation Week, thank you to our residents for all that you do. So at this point, I would like to hand the mic over to Dr. Sanjeev Sokalingam, our Vice Chair of Education in the Department of Psychiatry.
Thank you, Shaheen, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Don Wasylenki Education Day and also to CAMH and the Arel Auditorium here. It's nice you could join us in person here. We're glad to be hosting it with the department. I want to just do a quick few thanks. Shaheen did a lot of thank yous, so I'll make this very brief, but I will just say that thank you to Shaheen for her leadership and vision in chairing today's Don Wasylenki Education Day and the planning, and to Anne-Marie and team for all their work in setting this up. And I'd also just want to also thank Doctors Branka Ajic. Is Branka, could you put your hand up? So yes, and Joey Martinovic as well. Is Joey is Joey here? Not here yet. For their co-chairing and especially organizing the poster components and the conference as well. I also would like to say a huge thank you. We have all these events, as you see, throughout the day, but a lot of work and dedication for our poster assessors, who are people walking around who are providing feedback, which I think is really formative for especially first-time presenters here, as well as our mentors during our lunch here today. Again, all of those different areas and the time you're spending with our future education scholars and leaders is really critically important. Shaheen has talked about why Don Wasylenki Education Day is critical and so important to us each year. Wonderful. One thing I like about our conference and Education Day is that it brings together our many faculty, trainees, and our collaborators, people who may not be in our faculty but are working so closely with our diverse department. So again, I encourage you to take a look at all the posters, spend some time. These are a lot of work to put forward, but also flourish into wonderful scholarly opportunities and dissemination, and also the mentorship and workshops as well. And I'll just lastly say, before I move on to our lecture here, that this is, our department is well known for its education, scholarship, and innovation internationally. The unfortunate thing is, we're so well known that we do most of that outside of our department, and we never actually get a sense to know what's happening in our department. And this is really one of those days in which we can learn about the amazing work that many of you are a part of nationally and internationally. So with that, as Shaheen had said, today's lecture is named after Major General John Taylor Fotheringham, and it's the Fotheringham Memorial Lectureship, which will be delivered by Dr. Emile Servan-Schreiber, who Dr. Malsant will introduce shortly. And the talk will be on collective intelligence. But I want to say a few words about the Fotheringham Memorial Lecture, which is named in honor of Canada's 5th Surgeon General. Dr. Fotheringham had an exemplary record as an officer and physician, first joining the Armed Forces in 1898 and serving as the Surgeon General at the end of the First World War. Recognized for his outstanding gifts as a teacher, Dr. Fotheringham was a faculty member at Trinity Medical School and later the University of Toronto. And so, I'd personally like to express gratitude on behalf of the department to Dr. Fotheringham's daughter, Carolyn Helen Fotheringham. Her generous donation made this lectureship possible, continuing her father's legacy in medical education. And then what I would like to encourage you to do, we will have our lecture. Dr. Benoit Malsant will introduce our speaker. But I also just want to know this is Dr. Malsant's last Don Wasylenki Education Day. So, he would say this is his final tour, but I want to acknowledge his support for education and scholarship in the department. There are many things that we've been able to do and flourish throughout the continuum for undergrad, postgrad, continuing professional development and faculty development, and the continued effort and dedication, Dr. Malsant, and inspiring our teams to do over the last 10 plus years has been greatly appreciated. So first, join me in thanking Dr. Malsant and welcoming him to the stage to introduce our plenary speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Sokelingham, for your kind words, but you're correct. This is my last year. It is my last year There's a person before me who said, once I'm gone, they won't have me to hit or criticize anymore. But anyway, so I'm delighted to see all of you here today, which is a reflection of our community dedication to education and learning. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Emile Servan-Schreiber, who will be the keynote speaker today. And as Sanjeev said, because it's my last year of chair of the department, I refuse to follow the usual process and to let the committee select the keynote speakers. And I insisted that for the Don Wasylenki Day and for the newly renamed Molson Pollock Research Day, I will pick personally the keynote speaker, and I will pick people who are meaningful to me. So for the Molson Pollock Research Day, I encourage you on June 1925 to come, and you will see my mentor when I was young, and his name is Dr. Chip Reynolds, and I met him in 1995 in Pittsburgh, and he will tell his story. And for today, I picked Dr. Servan-Schreiber, and instead of a traditional formal introduction of a keynote speaker, Ben Gain, or communication expert, prepares some notes, I'm going to tell you more like a narrative, and it's 755 words long, so it takes about 5 minutes. And that narrative integrates some personal reminiscence of me, so it's egotistical. It's like the French philosophical Montaigne, okay? You think about your own experience, and because you know yourself better than any other human being, you could say it's narcissism or egotism, it doesn't matter to me. So I'm also a pinch of bipolar and a pinch of autism. You put all the three together and you create a so-called normal human being. So anyway, so I will share you my personal reminiscence, and I also think that they illustrate the concept of failure in academia, or personal destructive transformation, and work-life integration, as opposed to work-life balance. And I am, as some of you know, a person who believes that it's an illusion in academia. You can reach work-life integration. You're not going to reach work-life balance. That's a topic for another lecture. So we're going to go back to a time where I was a young man, and when I met Dr. Servan-Schreiber, and at that time his name was Emile Servan-Schreiber. And he was named after the title of a book actually called Emile, de l'éducation in French, which was one of the most famous books on education written by the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. When I met Emile, he was still in high school, and I was in my first undergraduate year. And at that time, I was majoring in engineering. And we were enjoying Paris too much, and we were not yet working hard enough. So I ended up dropping out of what I was my major in engineering, and I took 6 months off before restarting as a freshman pre-med. And Emile had to repeat his 12th grade because he didn't graduate from high school that year. And then he left Paris and went to Pepperdine University. For those of you who have not heard, I encourage you to Google it. It's on Malibu Beach. It's one of the most beautiful campuses in the US. And he was able to get some credit, and it's a true story, I'm not making it up, for surfing class. Okay? And thanks to his good grades, he was there at Pepperdine University. He was able to transfer to Carnegie Mellon University, located in Pittsburgh, and I joined him, paths had separated from Paris to California, and I went to Laval Medical School and then McGill to do my internship, and then I finished my internship. And I went to Pittsburgh to do a PhD, and I was a PhD student in the same lab he was. And while he was trying to create an artificial intelligence model of the mind with cognitive neuroscientists, I was trying to create an AI model of neuropsychiatric diagnosis. And we presented our common work together in a conference called the 12th Annual Symposium on Computer Application in Medical Care that was held in Washington, D.C., in 1988. That's actually the second paper on my CV. And we were doing the same type of work at that time. And that a guy that you may have heard called Jeff Hinton, and he was a young assistant professor. He was in the next lab. And then the difference between Hinton and other, is that a guy like me decided that AI was not ready for medicine. And I dropped out, and I decided to go back and became a failed psychiatrist and basically a clinical trialist. But Jeff Hinton actually buried himself. He left actually Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh because he didn't like that his work was financed by the military. He moved to U of T. He buried himself with his graduate student in the lab. Nobody heard about him for 20 years. And then he get out 15 years ago with the first AI translation program. And for those of you who paid attention, last year he got the Nobel Prize, 2024, and they gave him a Nobel Prize in physics, but that's really for his work in AI. The same kind of work we're doing. The difference is some people keep at it, and some people, like me, drop out and failed. And then, for those of you who have never heard of Jeff Hinton, and since we're talking about ancient history, and I'm dropping name, Emile and I, when we were in Carnegie Mellon and we were graduate students, we had a private dinner with a guy called Steve Jobs. I think most of you would recognize that name. In our own home, he came to our dining room, and we were reminiscing yesterday with Emile about the dinner. He was an angry, unpleasant character, worse than the critical Frenchman that you know. So this was around the time, as I say, I concluded that AI in medicine wouldn't work. I take my master program. I never have a PhD. I don't have a PhD after me. My title, I'm an MD, MS. I drop out. And as I said, I became a psychiatrist. By contrast, my friend Emile stuck with it. He finished the PhD. He interviewed for some position to become an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology. But instead, he decided to become an entrepreneur, as you have heard from Shane, and in the field of digital collective intelligence, that also called in some paper the wisdom of the crowd, and that's what you are going to hear about in the lecture. And some of us question the wisdom of the crowd if you look at the result of the election south of this border, but that's again another story. He will tell us why I'm wrong and he's right. So anyway, since 2000, the past 25 years, he had led a company called Hypermind, and he has divided his time between scientific research and collective intelligence and its practical application in prediction market for leading companies and government. He has pioneered many use of collective intelligence. He has participated in several major government research projects trying to harness it for making hard prediction. To give you an example, kind of prediction that you cannot do by creating a model or equation, but that you can do with collective intelligence, is to answer a question like, what and how will the war in Ukraine end? He's a founding member of the School of Collective Intelligence at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Morocco. His work has been featured in best-selling books like The Wisdom of the Crowd, in the New York Times, in The Economist, the Financial Times, Business Week Time, or Newsweek. And he has lectured on collective intelligence across the globe, including at the World Bank or the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia. And now we can say he has lectured at the University of Toronto and Cambridge. And while Emile and I stopped collaborating formally 35 years ago, our wife became friends, our children vacationed together, and we have continued our conversation about the world and the brain during late nights. It could be in Paris or on beaches in Greece. And I know you will enjoy his thoughts and insight. And I have the belief they will influence your work in a more profound way, like they have influenced my work, than a traditional lecture. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Servan-Schreiber.
Hello. I need to set this up first. Right. Technical interlude. I was saying to my daughter, no matter how awful my accent is, speaking after Benoit, I'm going to sound pretty good, right? Thank you, Benoit. Right. So We're going to talk about collective intelligence and how diversity powers intelligence. Powers intelligence to make everyone smarter, and everyone, I mean all of us together, but also everyone is each of us individually. Right? So this being the John Fotheringham lecture, normally I would begin by saying I'm so glad to be here, etc. But after reading actually John Taylor Fotheringham's lecture in 1922, which you can find online and which I think should be required reading for all of you, 8 pages of beautifully written lecture on the humanities and how it's useful for doctors. I'm going to use his own acknowledgement after I plug in the thing here. Because it's so much more beautifully worded than anything I could come up with. See if that works. Yes. So permit me to first congratulate myself upon the company which I again find myself, which is you guys, right? As teachers, as students. So I'm probably the only one in the room who's not a real doctor. Right? All of you, I only have a PhD. You guys are the real McCoy. But as a teacher myself, in the master's degree at Mohammed VI University on Collective Intelligence, and as a lifelong student, I feel very comfortable in this particular audience. Right? So John Taylor was first of all, let me just acknowledge the first paper that Benoit referred to that we wrote together, the second paper on the CV, the first on mine, from 1988, 37 years ago, and this is the 1,000 parameters AI model that we built to do sequential diagnosis, differential diagnosis of different kinds of dementia. And it was taking a long time to train this 1,000 parameter thing, and now, of course, you have like 174 billion parameter models that are actually working, so this was kind of fun to reminisce. Anyway, so John Taylor Fotheringham wrote this beautiful lecture, Benefits of Classical Studies for the Physician, and since he was so much in love with the humanities and the ancient authors, I thought I would give the ancient authors like Aristotle a call, because Aristotle was one of the first philosophers to actually talk about collective intelligence. And this is a beautiful quote from Aristotle in one of his books. The many, who are not as individuals excellent men, nevertheless can, when they have come together, be better than the few best people, right? Which is exactly the definition of collective intelligence. So it's a very ancient idea. It's just a very new science, right? The science of collective intelligence is only about 25 years old, right? So what we're going to be talking about today is the science of smarter groups, the science of smarter crowds, very large groups, and also the science of smarter you, right? And then eventually we'll reach the topic of the day, which Shaheen put a lot of pressure on me to come up with something about education, even though, I'm barely qualified to talk about medical education at all, right? But we're going to talk about maybe some ideas, radical ideas about how collective intelligence can maybe give you some ideas about how to do some things differently. But first, let's start by taking our phones out on silent mode, of course, but connected and flashing this, right? So when you flash this, I'm going to actually do it with you. Blank screen. But when I will conduct some polls, you will see some little squares appear. So if everybody, and every time we do some polls, the QR code is going to come up again. So you can flash it again if you didn't succeed the first time. And keep your phone on that page because the polls are going to keep going on the same page, right? So first poll. First of all, the polls are completely anonymous. Sometimes the question may appear very stupid. The answers won't be, but or sometimes there's no good answer, like this poll here, right? So this is just to see if it works, right? So it's completely anonymous. I don't know who answers what. Nobody knows one. So you can be totally honest. Please be totally honest. Are you smarter, do you think, than most of the people in this room? Right? So just click on the proper square. Done? All right. So we see the results here. So this is a very humble audience, right? Obviously. Usually, it's not as pronounced when I give this talk to regular companies. It's not as pronounced, this humility. Here it's quite amazing. You have been well trained for thinking in this way. But sometimes I get the completely reverse pattern, and that's when I give a talk to consulting companies, for example. Right? So, but here you guys are doing good. So what is collective intelligence? This is an example of collective intelligence. It's a termite mound discovered in 2018, I think, in Australia. And you can see, usually termite mounds are sort of boring skyscraper, Trump Tower type things, right? But this one, you can see what happens inside because it's had some kind of trouble. And you can see the richness and the sophistication of what was built by these tiny little brains coming together. And perhaps, I mean, if you see this, right, you cannot help to think that there is some intelligent design going on, right? I'm not talking about God type of intelligent design, but an intelligent designer happening here. If your kid, your 5-year-old on the beach were to build this, right, you would think your kid is a genius. Right? Perhaps it reminds you of this as well, right? For those of you who have gone to Barcelona, the Sagrada Familia, and the contrast between these two cathedrals goes to the heart of what we mean by collective intelligence. Right? So, first of all, there is strength in numbers, right? You take these little tiny brains with barely, my estimation, you know, looking at ants, what we know about ants, we don't know that much about termites, but I assume the brain size is about the same. So it's about 250,000 neurons in the brain of a termite. But you multiply that by a million termites in the colony, and you're able to achieve some amazing things that every individual in the colony is unable to even conceive, right? So strength in numbers. But the second principle is even more important, is that there is organization. Organization matters. So if you take the human brain of the Sagrada Familias, the cathedrals, architect, for example, who conceived this beautiful building, it only has, like the rest of your brains, about 80 billion neurons in it, right? But those 80 billion, if you make the calculation, it's 3 times fewer neurons in this guy's brain than there is in the termite colony. So how come with fewer neurons he can do so much more? It's because they are so much better organized in one human brain than they are in the colony. You know, the networks are richer, better connected. There's more organization to it, which allows it to do a lot more with a lot less. Right? So collective intelligence is in fact an artificial intelligence, right? Because it needs to be organized artificially in order to emerge and in order to maximize what you can get out of it. So funnily, not funnily, but interestingly, as you know, IQ was discovered by these 2 French guys. In 1905, they came up with the first IQ test. Essentially, it wasn't called IQ, it was called aptitude. IQ was invented just a few years later based on their work, but that was the first IQ test, the first measure of intelligence ever, right? And once you can start measuring something, you can start studying it. So in many ways, you know, this was the start of the science of psychology, because you finally had some way of measuring something about psychology, right? And it took more than 100 years for scientists on a more diverse team this time, right? Actually a woman on the team, leading the team from Carnegie Mellon, and then Tom Malone from MIT, who came up with this study published in 2010 of measuring the IQ of a group rather than an individual. Why did it take 100 years to have the idea to run a group through an IQ test? I don't know. That's the mystery of research and the beauty of research. There's many obvious ideas still lying around that you can just pick up as researchers probably, or somebody else will do it in 100 years, right? So they came up with this paper that published in Science in 2010, Evidence for Collective Intelligence Factor in the Performance of Human Groups. The first evidence, scientific evidence, that collective intelligence is not only real, but it's in humans, but it's also measurable, just like the IQ of an individual brain is measurable, right? And once you start being able to measure collective intelligence, then finally you can start the science of collective intelligence for real, right? Because one thing that's really interesting in a group of people is that if the group you find is not quite smart enough, you can intervene easily. You can do an operation on the group by removing somebody, putting somebody else, right? Which is harder to do on a human brain, right? The operations are harder to do. So what they found is that not only collective intelligence in a group exists, groups like you have around these tables. So there were groups of 4 to 6 people who would solve IQ tests together, right? Problem solving, etc. And then you would measure how long they take to find the solution and whether they find the right solution, etc. So then you have the IQ measure. And of course, they found that just like individuals, some groups are smarter than other groups, right? So then the question is, why is this group smarter than this one, right? Not only because there are maybe more women in this one than this one, but sorry, guys. So the question was that, why is it that some groups are smarter, right? So here are some possible answers, and I'm going to ask you to take your best shot here, your best guess. Is it that because the average IQ in the group is high? So if everybody in the group is smart, then the group is going to be smart, right? Or is it that there is somebody who is super smart in the group? There's a genius around the table, and that makes the group smart. Or maybe it's a matter of being happy to be together, being motivated to be together, and there's a good cohesion in the group. Or maybe it's a gender thing, right? So what do we have? Group cohesion. Okay, so you guys have been brainwashed just like every other group I talk to. So it's not only you, right? But human resource consultants have sort of given you the wrong idea here. In fact, it's the only factor in the list that has 0 correlation with the IQ of a group. The only one, right? Cohesion, motivation, satisfaction has no influence on the IQ of the group. It has influence on whether you want to get up in the morning and join your group, right? But not on whether your group is going to be smart solving problems, right? What does have influence is, for example, the average IQ, 15% correlation. So it's a factor, it's not a huge factor, right? It's more important to have somebody who's really smart, right? If you have Elon Musk on your, not Elon Musk, okay. Somebody else in your group that's really smart, you're going to be able to solve the problems and your group is going to appear smart, right? It's a little bit higher. But the most important factor is the percentage of women around the table. So I remind you, this is MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Science magazine, hardcore, right? The percentage of women in the group is the most important factor to make the group smart, right? Here's the data, right? So of course there's a lot of noise, but you can see there's a clear trend that when there's less than 50% women in the group, the average IQ of the group, the IQ of the group tends to be below average. When there's more than 50% women in the group, the IQ of the group is above average overall, right? So it doesn't mean that you need to have 100% women in the group for the group to be the smartest, right? There's a lot of noise there, but statistically, it's a very significant effect, a very significant trend, and very mysterious trend for at least half of the people in the room, right? and the team itself. So they decided to dig deeper and find out what's happening. What happens in the dynamics of a group with more women that makes the group smarter. And what they found is that one of the really important factors is that there is a better distribution of speaking time, right? So fewer people try to monopolize the conversation. Right? Makes sense, right? So it's mechanical, right? The fewer men there are, and the less mansplaining there is, right? But the other thing is that, it's fine that everybody gets to speak, but if nobody listens, it's not very useful. And so in groups of predominantly women, there's also a better quality of listening, right? Which is measured through this test that you guys probably know, the reading the mind in the eyes test, which measures social sensitivity. I think it's used for also some diagnosis of autism, right? So they found that the groups in which this social sensitivity measure, this ability to listen to verbal and nonverbal communication, was highest statistically in groups of women. And so what you have here, you know this test by heart, but did you ever take it yourself, by the way? Right? Are you able to figure out the emotion in that woman? Yeah, that's the easy one, right? How about this one? Concerned, yes, that's the right answer as well. So we can see that whether it's the previous question or this one, the majority of you, the group collective intelligence, got the result right, just like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, right? But there's also a significant number of responses which were wrong, right? So if you do this test, I don't know, how many of you have taken the test yourself? Okay. For those who haven't, please do it. It's fun. It's only 36 questions, 36 different pictures like that, and you will not usually get all of them right. But what's interesting is that when you look at populations of men and women who have taken this test, who are not autistic, these are, quote, normal people, right, with doses of lots of stuff that make them normal, as Benoit would say. But you find that statistically, the median guy is going to be slightly worse, about 5% worse than the median woman, right? You also find that there's lots of guys who are better than most women, right? So it's not a matter that all women are better than all men in this test, right? Some men have excellent social sensitivity. I score very high on this, for example. I do like 36 out of 37. So, but some of you, maybe, I'd be interested to know what the score for some of you would be as well. And there's also like a couple of guys who are not autistic, but who are totally out of line on this test for some reason, which I don't know about. So what we find here is that the takeaway, if you like, is not that we need more women in groups to make the group smart. It's that we need more people who have this emotional quotient, right? And, in the 90s, when this idea of emotional intelligence was coming out, it was, cover of Time magazine, why EQ is more important than IQ, right, for your success. So the people have tended to oppose IQ and EQ, right, as if they were rivaling each other. But what we find through the study of collective intelligence is that, in fact, the IQ of the group, the ability of the group to rationally solve problems, depends mostly on the EQ of the individuals in the group and not on the IQ of the individuals in the group, right? So it's a matter of bandwidth, if you like, the matter of, if you think about it, in terms of communication ability, how much bandwidth there is between us around the table. What makes the internet valuable is not the size of the computers that are connected to the internet, right? It's the size of the bandwidth. 5G is so much better than 3G, right? Because we can communicate more through it and do more interesting stuff with it. So it's the same idea, right? And it's also something that happens in the real world. So it's not only in the labs of psychologists at MIT and Carnegie Mellon, it's in the real world. So, for example, this guy, Michael Ferrari, at University of Geneva, he's been tracking the performance, the profits on the stock market of companies in France, the biggest companies in France, the equivalent of the S&P 500, but it's the CAC 40, the 40 biggest companies in France. He's been tracking their performance depending on how feminized the management is, right? So he looks at the proportion of women management for each company, and then he looks at how well they perform on the stock market, right? And he's been doing this for, I think now about 15 years, right? At least 15 years, right? And so here I can show you, these are the companies, some of them you may know, some of them you don't. LVMH, L'Oreal, of course, but there's more than just luxury companies there. There's lots of banking as well, etc. So all these companies, these 15 companies who have at least 35% women managers in them, he groups them into a subset of the CAC 40, calls it the Femina index rather than the CAC 40 index. And then he looks at the performance of 1,000 euro invested in over a 10-year period, starting with the financial crisis of 2006, all the way to a renewed period of growth that ended around 2016. If you look at this 10-year period, your $1,000 investment, in the time of crisis, the Femina index performs much better, actually makes a profit, whereas the overall CAC 40 of all the biggest French companies makes a loss. And then in terms of growth, when the economy is good, they perform even better, right? So in the end, you would have made 60% profit investing in feminized companies. You would have lost 4% investing in the overall index of all the companies, right? And it's true even to, during the pandemic. This is the profit margin of the company plotted against the percentage of women managers in the companies of all the CAC 40. You can see there's clear correlation going on here. So it's real impact in the real world. Of course, it doesn't explain the entire success of these companies, just the fact that there's more women managers. But I think there's converging evidence, if you like, that when you have more women involved in management, you tend to have more innovative companies, innovative not only in terms of products, but also innovative in terms of management practices itself. So wherever people have looked at this, the so-called female participation effect around the world, whether it's Northern Europe, Southern Europe, China, America, with all different kinds of companies, private, listed, etc., they always find the same result, right? So it's a universal result. It's not only in France, it's everywhere you look, right? Now the reverse of that, in terms of management, is a beautiful study published in 2013 by these people who looked for 10 years at the size of the signature of the CEOs of the S&P 500 companies over a period of 10 years. So they take the annual report, they look at the size, they normalize it on a business card to see who has the biggest, and then they correlate it with the performance of the companies, and the correlation is, of course, highly negative. The higher the ego of the CEO is, the less he's able to listen to his collaborators, is N-1s or whatever, and the more mistakes he's able to make to drive the company's profits down. Right? Beautiful study. So now let's talk about what's called the wisdom of crowds. Everybody's heard of the wisdom of crowds, right? Maybe you've heard of the study of the Galton and the beef, etc. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. Of course, it was invented, interestingly, not the date. You remember the invention, the discovery of IQ by the French in 1905, right? This was a discovery of collective intelligence by the English across the channel in 1906, so basically about the same time, right? So Galton was a horrible old white male type of guy, a cousin of Darwin, and fascinated by the work of Darwin. He eventually thought it would be great to apply the principles of evolution and breeding to humans, and invented eugenism and wrote several books about eugenism. But apart from that, he was a genius statistician and made enormous contributions to the science of statistics. And this was his last published discovery, the discovery of what the so-called today wisdom of crowds, published in 1906 in Nature. A few paragraphs that 100 years later changed the world with the internet. So, he was aware of this data that was available from a country fair where lots of people were trying to guess. They participated in a contest, paid a few cents each to participate in a contest to make the best guess about the weight of the meat that could be extracted from the animal. So not the weight of the animal, but something a bit more technical, right? And he reflected that all these people were probably as unaware of the technical aspects of this kind of question as most voters would be just unaware of politics in general. And at the time, England was discussing giving more power, being a better democracy, giving more power to the people, less to the lords. And so he was very skeptical as a member of the elite. And so he said, this would be interesting, see if a collective can be smart. Maybe democracy might work if it is, but I'm very skeptical. Right? So he collected all the estimates, 787, no Excel spreadsheet available to compute the average guess. So he put them in order, and then he took the one in the middle. You can see how they went from the lowest around 400 kilos to highest around 700 kilos, so a huge differential there of estimates. He took the median as the one that's right in the middle, as the guess of the crowd overall, and of course it was very, very close. Okay, so that's the story that everybody knows, but what's interesting as well is the question I asked myself and discussed in my book, which is how would that wisdom of crowd evolve? How would the mistake, the size of the error evolve as you reduce the size of the group? Right? So instead of taking all the 787 estimates, what happens if you take only 70 estimates picked at random in the group, right? And you look at the average error of every random group of 70 people you could assemble, would that be higher or lower than the error of the entire group? So how does the collective intelligence evolve with the size of the group, basically is the question. And this is the data. So it's interesting because you can derive three principles there. The first, as you can see on the top left here, you have the average individual error. So this is a group of one. Take somebody at random from the group, look at the size of the error. On average, it's going to be 4.5%, right? And then on the bottom right, you have the error of the average, right? So this is a little bit hard for your brain, but the thing I'm trying to remember it without looking, the average error is much worse, much bigger than the error of the average, right? Which is kind of magic, because you take all these people who are wrong, put them together, and they are right. Okay, the wisdom of the fools we were talking about yesterday, right? So the second thing is that you can see the error diminishes constantly as you increase the size of the group. So smarter groups, larger groups are smarter. And finally, the way that it diminishes is not linear, but it's diminishing returns, right? So what that means is that you get a lot more, you get a lot of the power, most of the power of the wisdom of crowds, of collective intelligence, right at the beginning. You don't need hundreds of people to become smarter really fast. You just need to turn around and take the half dozen or 10 people you have around you, get together as a group, and you can get most of the benefits of collective intelligence right there. And then if you have access to hundreds more people, then you can improve, but it's a long tail kind of improvement, right? So we don't have a beef available. I tried sometimes to offer myself as the bovine in the room, but it was not always conclusive. So we'll try it with this one. How many people do you think there is in, what does 5 mean? Okay. How many people do you think there is in this group here? So you can try counting them one by one, but that won't succeed because I'm only going to give you 10 more seconds to figure it out. So you can try different ways of estimating this. You done? Okay. Let's see if that worked. All right, so we're going to look for the median, right? So the median is where we have 50% of the answers. So we have 3% on A, 8% on B, that's 11, with the 20 on C, that's 31. So basically, the right answer should be in D, right? D gets you to 51%, and the right answer is E, right? It's 277. So it's really close to, it's close enough. Because what's interesting is not how close the average is. It's how close it is compared to the wide variety of individual answers, right? So if you had to ask, without knowing who among you is good at estimating this kind of thing, if I had to choose, right, like I'm going to ask this guy, or I'm going to ask this woman here, right, I would likely do a huge mistake. I could be all over the place. So my reliable go-to method is to ask the whole group, and then I know I'm going to be a little bit wrong, but I'm not going to be hugely wrong, right? So that's the reliability of the wisdom of crowds. Right? Estimating and prediction are all about being better than the others, not about being perfect. Right? Let's try this one now, because now we're going to look at, so you have to find the missing shape, right? This is like a straight IQ test type thing. So this one's pretty easy, I think. Right, it's A. Whoa, look at that, 100%, right? No, this one is much harder. Done? All right, so now we have several wrong answers, and we have 50% correct answers on A, right? What you can see here is that even though, as well, there are many wrong answers, the group gets it right. So when you do this with a large group of people, with IQs ranging from low IQ, around 65, to high IQ, 135. Take this like general population that's representative of the IQ distribution in the population. What you find is that as you increase the size of the group and you take the highest IQ in the group, is going to outperform the group. It's going to outperform the majority guess, which is the red line. Right? The best IQ in the group is going to outperform the IQ of the whole group. Okay? So that would seem to contradict this idea of the wisdom of crowds, right? It's better to have like a super genius than to ask the group. But if you look at subpopulations, you take all the low IQ people, put them together. You take all the high IQ people, put them together. You take all the medium IQ people, put them together. Then you find the reverse, which is that in a homogeneous type of people, which probably like people in this room, like you're all pretty smart, you'd be in the same range, then you would get this effect that the group is smarter than the highest IQ in the group. Okay.
Vice Chair, we don't want you to repeat. She didn't get it. It's an important concept.
Important concept. So we're trying to compare the crowd IQ with the maximum individual IQ in the group, right? So if we do that on a general population, we find that the maximum IQ in the group is better than the crowd, right? Because basically the crowd is weighted down by the super low performance of a lot of people, right? But if you homogenize the group, you take only the low IQ people and you look at the phenomenon for only that population, or only the high IQ people, or only the medium IQ, so comparable IQ people, then you find that the group outperforms the highest individual in the group. Okay. So it's time for a little bit of math, and I know you hate this slide already, right? But it's important to know that everything I talked about, this idea of collective intelligence, is not wishful thinking, it's actually a law of nature, right? And it's a law of nature because you can write it as math, and math that's actually real math, not, psychoanalytic math, right? Not Lacanese mathematics, but real mathematics, actually high school algebra. And I'm going to tell you what that means. It's called the diversity theorem. So this whole idea that diversity is important to make you smart is not some weird, crazy EDI phantasm, right? It's actually real math. It's a law of nature. What that means is that the error of the group, so you compare the group estimate with the truth, right? The error of the group depends on two things and depends equally on these two things, right? The first term is the average individual error, right? So basically, if you look at it the other way, it means the amount of expertise that every individual brings to the table, right? So obviously, the less individuals are prone to make errors in the group, and the more likely the group is going to be also making small errors, right? So the error of the group is going to diminish with the error of the individuals in the group. That's totally obvious, not so interesting. What's really interesting is because of the minus sign here, you can see that the more you increase the diversity of the estimates in a group, and the more you're going to drive down the error of the whole group as well. So that's not intuitive at all, right? It means the less people agree, and the more likely it is that the group will be correct, right? For the same amount of expertise, if the expertise come from different angles, so that they contribute something different, then that diversity is going to drive the performance of the group. It also means that if you can replace, basically you can play on these two levers equally, right? You can increase the diversity if you don't have enough expertise. You can increase the expertise if you don't have enough diversity, right, to get the same performance. And this is an example, it works with lawyers and law students, but it could work with doctors and medical students as well. And you can keep that in mind. It was actually run as an experiment with professional attorneys with 20 years of experience, so expert lawyers, trying to estimate the result of a trial, and also some very smart law school students at Stanford University, right? So super smart with no real-world experience, okay? Just like super smart medical students in your universities, right? So you can see here that if you take one attorney and one law student, the attorney is going to make an estimate of the result that is twice as good, right? But then if you take several students and you average it together, you average their estimates together, you get this wisdom of crowds effect, right? So that at 14 students, you can rival the accuracy of one attorney, right? It's much cheaper as well, right? And if you take more, then you can do better than the specialist, right? With less expert people, but more of them with different opinions. Right? But of course, it doesn't mean that the expert, specialist, doctor, or attorney is useless, because if he had or if she had the good idea of asking a colleague about their opinions, maybe the experts could benefit also from collective intelligence, but at the expert level. And now what we find is that it takes 42 students to do as well as just 2 experts combining their opinions. But the problem, which was noticed in this paper as well, is that the more expert you are, and the less likely you are to consider somebody else's opinion. And that will get in the way of collective intelligence really easily. Right? So, diversity, collective intelligence, great, but it's also interesting to look at, because we are talking about cognitive diversity, right? Opinion diversity, right? But we can also look at the effects of racial, ethnic diversity, which should not have any effect, right? What matters is how diverse you are in your mind, in your opinions you can bring to the table, not the color of your skin, right, or your ethnic makeup, right? But they did run this experiment, and they did it in Asia with different ethnicities, Chinese, Malay, Indian, and also in the United States, in Texas, with whites, Latinos, and African Americans. And what people had to do, it was a fake trading desk simulation where people arrive in the room and they will have to trade on a company that is described to them on a fake stock market. They will have to trade against the others, and we'll look at how good that group of traders was eventually to figure out the correct price of that company in the real world on the real stock market, right? So that's a measure of how good the trading desk of 6 people was. Right? And the groups could be, when you enter the room, you can see that you're among a bunch of white males, actually white people, right? Or you can be among a group of people who are not all like you. Right? There's whites, there's Latinos, there are African Americans, or there's different kinds of Asian ethnicities around the table, and then you go to your desk and you start trading against the guys. Okay. What we find is that the diverse groups are so much better at this than the homogeneous groups. Okay, whether it's in the US or in Asia, it's the same result. Also find that, of course, in the US, they're not as good as in Asia about this, but that's a different issue. The other interesting aspects of this experiment is that before people started interacting on the market, on the simulated market, by trading against each other, essentially, we asked them, the researchers asked them to give their initial estimate, just like they did for the beef of Galton, right? Give their initial estimate. So then we can look at what happens, the collective intelligence before the interaction on the market, just when individuals combine their individual estimates, and the collective intelligence after the interaction on the market, where people actually have to consider each other's opinions directly and confront them, right? And the result is that the accuracy in the diverse group increases with the direct confrontation with other people's opinions, right? Whereas in the homogeneous group, the initial estimate was better than the final estimate of the group after it started interacting with each other. Right? So what happened? Huh? Yeah, but why is there more groupthink in homogeneous groups? No, they stopped thinking. Right? It's a very efficient heuristic in the primitive brain that basically if you're among people just like you, they might as well think for you. You can do something else with your brain during that time, right? But when you are among people who don't look like you, automatically you're like, can I trust these people to think for me? I might as well just think for myself or think critically about what I hear, etc. And what that does, even though it's sort of the dark side of collective intelligence, right? What that does is that it makes everybody think more independently. And the smartest groups, curiously, are those where everybody contributes their independent thinking without being overly influenced by other people. Because otherwise you lose the diversity of thought that we saw powers the diversity theorem and makes the group smart. Right? So ethnic, pure color, I mean, here's the ethnic, of course, study, but it's anything that makes us look different, right? Could be men, women, could be old and young. It could be fashionable, not fashionable, whatever makes us different and makes us not feel that we are part of that group. Then it kicks in this independent thinking, critical thinking that is required for collective intelligence, right? So everything I told you is, of course, complete BS because we know that crowds are stupid, right? And this is the example that was, I mean, there's many other examples since then, but this is the example that was put in my head when I was a kid in school, like, the sign of conformity, everybody, doing the same sign. Berlin 1936 Olympic Games. And this stupidity of crowds was beautifully theorized by this French sociologist, Gustave Le Bon, in the 19th century, in this fantastic book that is worth reading still today. It's a bestseller still in France. All the elites in France in the political schools are taught to read this book. It's required reading to learn how stupid the masses are and how you can manipulate them as a result, right? Which explains a few things. So the theory is that crowds are always intellectually inferior to the thinking man, right? And also that you can take somebody who's pretty smart, put them in a group, they become stupid very quickly. And that's true too. It happened to us, happens to you as a teenager all the time, right? You can be smart, but among your friends, you do something really stupid, and it happens to me still at least once a week, when I'm with my colleagues. So how do you reconcile this? Well, there's a recipe. There's a recipe to avoid groupthink, and that recipe is going to allow you to produce collective intelligence if you follow the ingredients. So the ingredients are, first of all, diversity of thought. But then there's the problem that even though people around the table may think differently, they may not feel that it's appropriate to voice their opinions, right, for various reasons. Maybe because it's dangerous to do so, maybe they will be penalized, maybe whatever. So there needs to be processes, and that's where the collective intelligence becomes artificial and organized. There needs to be processes which are artificial, which do not emerge naturally, to force people or to encourage people or to incentivize people to actually say what they have on their mind. So the environment has to be sufficiently comfortable for everyone that they feel comfortable or they feel required to actually be honest about what they think, right? And so that diversity can actually go and be put in the open on the table, and then it can be efficiently aggregated into not a consensus, because consensus is death, right? If you enter into your meeting thinking you need to all agree when you get out, the meeting is already dead, right? What you need to come up with is a decision, right? And so the decision comes from aggregating all the diverse opinions and then with some kind of rule deciding how to proceed given everything that's been expressed, right? So it could be a vote in an election. We don't elect people by consensus. We elect people by majority, right? Which is different. It means a lot of people are not happy with the result, but they agree that, they agree on the rule for deciding how to move forward, right? Or it could be taking the average like we did with the little people in the brain or what Galton did. Or it could be when you want to make predictions about the future is taking bets, right? That's a great way of confronting different opinions and making sure they agree. So here's an example of a study we conducted with Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Actually, we started a year before the pandemic. And then as the pandemic arrived, we continued for a while. But we were making predictions about the severity of outbreaks, infectious disease outbreaks for 19 different viruses for a year with hundreds of participants, 70% of which were public health experts or medical professionals, veterinary researchers in biology, stuff like that. And they were all interested in answering questions that would try to assess the severity of outbreaks. Like, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we asked this question, we were still in March, right? And we asked this question, how many countries do you think will report at least 1,000 cases of COVID before April, right? So is this going to be a big thing or a small thing, etc.? So less than 16, etc., different number of countries, and people would go on the internet, they would see the question, they could enter a probability forecast for these different types of questions, right? Different answers. So they would say, okay, severity of not severe at all, less than 15 countries, 0% chance, more than 45 countries, 52% chance that's going to be the level of severity we'll observe, etc. So then we collect all these individual forecasts and we track, we aggregate them together, we track them over time, we display them on the screen, as you can see in the chart here, to see how it evolves. And people have all this available, they can discuss in forums as well. And they have to answer these 61 questions over a year and a half about different diseases around the world, right? And so then we have a measure of the accuracy of individuals, those individual public health and medical experts, on assessing, making predictions. And we also have the the accuracy of the group, right? But first, let's look at the individuals. These are the 562 errors, levels of errors of all these different forecasters. So the highest are the worst, the ones at the bottom are the good ones, they are better forecasters. Most people cluster around the level of blind chance forecast. Okay, that means the proverbial monkey throwing darts at the answers, right? But those people are not monkeys, right? They are, medical professionals. I almost said like you, but no. They are medical professionals mostly, right? And yet they're really bad at this because it's really hard, right? As Yogi Berra, one of Benoit's hero, would say, prediction is really difficult, especially about the future, right? So it's just really hard. The data is not very good. It's noisy. It's not timely. By the time you get data from Congo, 3 days later in your lab in Baltimore, it's already outdated. So it's just really difficult. But if you take the average forecast of everybody, the simple average, you get an accuracy that beats everyone except those 6 guys at the bottom, right? So it's basically 99%, beats 99% of the individuals by simple average, just like Galton did, right? And if you enhance the average with some simple algorithms, for example, looking at the forecast of last week is not as useful as the forecast of this morning, etc., or the past accuracy of different people, and you do the weighted average instead of simple average, then you beat everyone, right? You can do that on a prediction market. You've heard about prediction markets. You can do that for all kinds of things. You want to know whether Kennedy is going to be the director of health south of the border. The probability this morning is 80% chance that he will be confirmed, for example. You can do that on any question you can ask in all kinds of domains, and you will get really powerful results. This is the results of 10 years of these kinds of predictions on 900 questions with almost 3,000 possible outcomes and almost 1 million predictions made. And what you see at the bottom here is the probability that is given by the crowd for these events happening, and then you see the reality, which is the frequency of occurrence of these events. And what's beautiful is the correspondence, right? So if you take all the events predicted with a 10% probability of happening, 1 in 10 is going to happen, basically, right? And the same thing at every level of probability, almost perfect correspondence. It's just amazing. It means people are not able as a group to tell you what will happen or what won't happen, but they can give you a very precise probability about whether it's going to happen or not, right? Just like I can give you a very precise probability that if I throw this coin, there's 50% chance it's going to be on tail, right? If I'm correct about the coin, right? So that's the same thing. So we are using this actually today, and for those of you interested in what's going on in Ukraine, I invite you to maybe participate. We just launched this last week. It's a site created by the Swedish Defense Ministry to help the Ukrainians better assess what's going on around the war in Ukraine, both in terms of military, political, and economic questions. So these are questions that are actually asked by the Ukrainian decision makers who are uncertain about these things, and they'd like to get better predictions about this. And so they ask the entire world who is interested in what's going on in Ukraine to combine their forecast, to contribute their thinking and their forecast to the site, and then they aggregate those results and they give them to the Ukrainians analysts to try to get a clearer picture of the future and help the decision makers about that. So if you're interested in what's going on over there, please join. It's kind of fun and highly interesting. So I know I have very little time left, but I'm going to take 5 more minutes. To discuss my book in French. Actually, it's available in English, free PDF. I'll give you the link afterwards if you want to. But when it came out, what surprised me is called, super collective intelligence, basically. That's what it's about. And I was very surprised because it appeared in the personal development section of the bookstores. I called the editor, I said, what's going on? It should be anywhere else than in the personal development, next to please help me live, how to stop being a victim, my program against depression. It's like, hey, guys, this is collective intelligence, right? It's not about you, right? But I was, she told me, don't worry, it's the only place where books actually sell. It's the only shelves that sell books. But as I started giving talks about the book, it occurred to me very quickly that I needed to find something that people could take away for themselves, right? And so I started thinking about, what is it that can be a personal takeaway here? And I figured very quickly that, in fact, the talk should not be titled How Diversity Makes Everyone Smarter, but How Diversity Makes Me Smarter. And the reason for that is that we actually have data about this. This is Yann Lequin, who's one of the inventors of the deep learning algorithms that power AI, right? So he says prediction is the essence of intelligence. So it means those people who are the better forecasters are the smartest among us, basically. That's what he's saying, right? And so we had a chance to test that with the Wharton School during a big government project financed by the intelligence agencies in the US over the last decade, making geopolitical predictions on a wide scale for 4 years with 10,000 participants, 500 questions, 100 questions a year that were asked by the CIA, and tried to figure out whether people as a crowd or individually could be good at this, whether it could help the agencies. And what we found is that some people are just really, really good at this. And they are called super forecasters. There's actually a book that came out called Super Forecasting from this project that explains the psychology of those people that are just really good at predictions, right? Some people are really good at math. These guys are really good at predictions, okay? And what makes them different from you and me essentially comes down to this. Basically, how you think is much more important than what you know, right? Intelligence, as the great psychologist Piaget says, is basically not what you know, but what you do when you don't know, right? So these guys have a method for figuring out what they need to know before they can make a forecast, where they can go to find the information they need. They are not smarter than you and me. They're just more analytical about this particular thing, right? They're more disciplined about it than we are. And one of the things that they're really good at is active, open-minded thinking. So do you guys know what that is? Right? So it's the uncanny ability that very, very few of us have to enjoy having people contradict you. Right? So not only do they enjoy it, but they actually think that when they will actively seek people who will give them contradictory opinions and tell them, you got it wrong, you didn't think about this, you forgot to look at that, your theory is completely flawed, here's why, etc. And they're super happy when they meet somebody like that rather than somebody who agrees with them, because they think they will learn something and eventually it will help them be right. And they want to be right. They don't care about convincing you, they just want to be right for themselves. Right? They enjoy that. They're very humble about the world. The number one guy on Hypermind who's the best forecaster, the top two, one is called Silence and the other is called Modest. Right? No, self-chosen usernames, right? So only 2% of our participants were in that category. And they were really good. They were top of the leaderboard first year, top of the leaderboard second year, constantly top of the leaderboard. Amazing people. And the reason is that they were able to consider other people's opinions. They were open to the diversity of the knowledge in the brains around them. So I know this guy was a big racist, whatever, and he's being canceled all over the world. There's a hotel in Geneva. When I was a kid, it was called Hotel du Président Wilson, and now it's called Hotel du Président. So, but he also saved Europe. So as a French guy, one of the reasons I'm here today is because actually he made the decision to send the GIs to Europe. Right? And he also had this brilliant idea in his functioning that even though he didn't even have a phone on his desk at the time, we have access to the whole world in our little phones. He had access to only a few people around him. He said, when I think, I use my brain, I use all the brains that I can borrow. And that's the secret of intelligence. You cannot take a pill. Maybe, I don't know. You guys have a pill you can give to people to get smarter, but you cannot do like a Sudoku intense, crossword puzzle therapy to become a smarter person, but you can use the brains around you to become a smarter person. Right? So we have to get away from this Descartes paradigm that we grew up in, which is I think, I am. So a lot of I's in that sentence. And perhaps if Descartes was here in 2024 with his MacBook Pro, he would tell you, the secret is I think smarter. Right? I think with many, therefore I am smarter. Right? So what does that mean for education? Just a very quick idea, because I'm not an expert. I don't even play one on TV. But just an example of something that's been done that takes a radical approach to collective intelligence in education, which is this school of coding called 42. I don't know, do you guys know about this? There's one in Quebec, but there's 50 plus around the world. It started in Paris a few years ago. They have 50 campuses, 31 countries. They have graduated 100,000 people plus. They have 22,000 in class today around the world. It was created by this brilliant guy. It's basically the idea is to have coding schools for 4 years with no teachers at all. Just groups of students, peer-to-peer learning, and it works around these lines. First of all, everything is project-based, not lecture-based, right? So people have to get together, do projects together, and the projects become more and more difficult as they progress. The evaluation is done by your peers, so you work in group, everybody criticizes each other, but eventually you need to get the project done together, and that's how you're going to learn. It's gamified, so you have easy projects at the beginning, and just as in a game, once you master a level, then you can unlock the next level and continue your project. So if you unlock your levels faster than other people, then you can progress faster than other people, right? So it's very personalized as well, very self-directed. You need to figure out who to ask when you don't know, where to go, which resources are available to you. Teachers are not there to tell you. They will eventually, evaluate whether you mastered the level, but that's about it, right? And no teachers, no classes, and therefore no tuition as well. It's entirely free. The business model is a little bit different. Completely free education, but then you give 10% of your earnings for a few years to your campus in order to train the next guys. Right? So can that be applied to psychiatry, medical education? To some extent, probably, not completely, right? Because there's more ethical considerations in what you do than there are in coding, but it's a skill, just like coding is a skill. This idea of project-based is also something that could be easily incorporated. Peer evaluation, working as a group, criticizing each other's diagnostics, all this can be adapted. So, just food for thought. If you have a chance to go to Quebec, maybe you can visit as well the École 42 over there. It's very inspirational, the way that they apply collective intelligence in a radical way to education. Free PDF for the book, if you want, you can download from Hypermind. You'll get the presentation, so you don't have to take a picture, because you will receive the presentation with the link. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Servan-Schreiber, for this compelling and excellent presentation, sharing your knowledge and expertise in collective intelligence and the compelling evidence on how diversity can make everyone smarter. So we have a few minutes right now for some questions. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions for Dr. Servan-Schreiber, and we'll try to get the mic to your table. So I see there's a question at the back, so I'm going to try to get the mic back there.
So, of course, it's a big question for people like me who believe in, the wisdom of the groups. When you see that a democracy is apparently so dysfunctional that it's able to re-elect, it's the re that hurts, the re-elect somebody who doesn't believe in elections, right? So that seems completely contradictory and absurd and unwise. It's like self-destructive. But as an optimist, I choose to see there's something different going on. First of all, the recognition that the system in the US was just not working well, right? So continuing the system may be the worst mistake than trying to shake the system up, right? So, I don't know which psychiatrist, maybe it was Freud, maybe it wasn't, but the famous phrase that, basically the mental sickness is trying to do the same thing over and over even though it doesn't work, right? So I don't know what the exact quote is, but continuing the same system in the US when clearly it's not working for so many people was probably the worst thing to do, even though in the short term it maybe would have felt good. In the long term, you need a shake-up. And we know that in cognitive sciences, we have this idea that when you're in a problem space where there are many different stable states you can reach, you can be in what we call a local minimum, right? Where you're in a comfortable position. It's not optimal, and the only way you can get to a more optimal solution, a better solution to your problem, is to shake up the problem space in order for you to get out of your hole and maybe wander and find a different hole that's deeper, which is a better solution that satisfies more people. So I think we're in this process here where the American electorate chose to shake things up in search for a better solution. It doesn't mean that it believes Trump is the better solution, but Trump is the way to initiate the search for something different and hopefully something better. So that's the way I choose to look at it. It doesn't mean that it won't hurt for a few years, but that's, sometimes, you're well placed to know that you need sometimes to swallow hard medicine in order to get better. So.
Thank you. I think we have a question at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm wondering if anyone has looked at the benefits of age diversity, specifically looking at children and adolescents.
I'm not aware of that. But it's clear that in the workplace, for example, the new generations think in a completely different way than the older generations. I know, for example, when we started pitching collective intelligence in management 25 years ago, people who were in power in management looked at us like Martians. They did not understand what we were talking about, but obviously now that the digital natives who grew up with the internet are the power managers today, it feels completely natural to them to have more input from more people in their decision making. So you can see the change very easily. But it's also true that young people have a different kind of vibe and energy that they bring to the workplace. But the older people have a completely diverse, completely different way of approaching things, and obviously the winning combination is to put them together one way or another.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for this talk. I was wondering what happens with...
Where are you?
Oh, I'm here in the middle. I can stand up. I was wondering what happens with mis and disinformation and how that impacts collective intelligence, because there's something about bringing diversity of opinion, but I imagine a lot of the studies are based on actually shared facts when you're doing kind of a trading desk and things like that. So I was wondering how those different elements play into this.
Well, misinformation is going to create noise, right? And if that's all you have available, then it's the garbage in, garbage out rule that is going to apply, right? So if nobody knows what's going on, just like sometimes in these epidemic predictions, right? When you don't have the data from Congo, or when the data from Congo is a week old, and even if it was timely, you know it's going to be bad because it's unreliable and it doesn't capture what's going on because they don't have the sensors on the ground or the observers, right? So when the data is bad, you cannot process it into something that's good, right? The only way collective intelligence works is by soliciting and aggregating knowledge that is partial and distributed, right? So where everybody knows something, nobody necessarily knows everything, but and the knowledge is distributed all around the organization, right? So that you create these crowd forecasting algorithms or prediction markets, and what they do is they attract information with incentives. They give incentives to the people who know more to express themselves in order to win something, for example, in the prediction market, right? Or in the stock market. So if you have information, you will bring it to the market because you're incentivized to participate. And that's what they do. But if there's no knowledge, there's no aggregation.
Great, thank you.
I think we have a question back there. Go ahead.
Thanks for the great presentation. I'm just curious. So let's say if we replace a few people in the group with the GenAI models, what will be happen and what will be the impact? Let's say if in the long run we increase the proportion of the GenAI models in the group.
I'm sorry, can you bring the mic closer
I'm sorry.
And say again?
So I'm just curious. So if we replace a few people in the group with the GenAI models, and how that will have impact on the result for the future studies like that. And let's say if we increase the proportion of the GenAI models in the group, and what would happen? Just curious.
Right. So this is a very active area of investigation, of course, especially in prediction. It's a very new type of thing. Only recently, for about a year, have AI models been able to start making predictions of the kind that I showed you, right? And what we find there is that when we give people access to the AI model thinking and prediction, they will all tend to take that into serious consideration, and therefore it will reduce the diversity of people's opinions to the opinion of the AI, right? And so people will become individually more expert, but collectively you have increased the expertise component of the diversity theorem, if you like, but you have reduced the diversity component, and usually you don't have an improvement in the collective ability. So taking a crowd of people with no AI and taking a crowd of people to whom you give the AI thinking, you will get the same performance. There will not be any improvement because you win on expertise, you lose on diversity, right? And when you give the AI the thinking of people, then the AI becomes a little bit better. But it's not better than the crowd by itself. So it's still very not conclusive.
Thank you. I think we have a question. Paul, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was really interesting to kind of highlight variables that can optimize crowd thinking and some of the discussions about politics. Like I was wondering the opposite end in some ways. Like if you manipulate those variables, you might also be able to control the crowd thinking response. So, ensuring certain voices are prioritized, quieting people that we might view as intellectuals, or reducing the diversity, restricting the voices of certain groups, even to kind of affecting the social sensitivity through different ways. And I was wondering if, there's a lot of literature on how to optimize. Is there literature around how, like, manipulating those variables can have the opposite effect, or how could control group thinking in ways that are, like, less positive?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what you look at X, for example, right? So I was on X a little bit less and less. And one of the reasons I'm less and less on X is that even though I don't subscribe to Elon Musk's feed, every time I open X, the first thing I see is Elon Musk's latest stupid declaration about something, right? So obviously there is an effort, conscious effort to reduce the diversity of thinking available to me on the platform by promoting, as you say, giving some voices a much larger weight than others, and especially those that I didn't even choose to have in my feed, right? So once you understand the diversity theorem and how expertise and diversity and information and diversity of thinking play with each other to create collective performance, then you can obviously use that to optimize or to disturb the collective intelligence, right? So if you feed fake news or if you promote one point of view heavily compared to others, then you will reduce the diversity and create, if it's outright lies, you will reduce not only the diversity, but also the expertise of individuals, and that will create problems. But you can also use that in the other way to optimize, right? So collective intelligence, like every other technology, can be used for good or ill.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So Cameron, go for it.
Hi. My question's related, or similar to Paul's, but a little bit different. So you gave the two striking examples of, a number of different kinds of tasks for which collective intelligence is superior to the highest, individual intelligence within the group. And then you also gave the example of, groupthink or, very, like, other tasks for which groups don't arrive at the best solution. So I'm wondering if it's quite clear in, research, or if there's a clear understanding as to which tasks are better suited to group efforts and which are more, for which group efforts might not arrive at the best solution. So I feel like there's a sort of a separate body of, like, literature around those examining the way groups arrive at solutions to moral problems or make decisions around, moral interventions where, let's say I were to see someone on the street who'd fallen, I wouldn't think anything of rushing over maybe to help them up and asking them if it was okay. But a group that's sort of, like a type of group, a bunch of pedestrians in the street, a mob, seeing someone fall in the street, no one would intervene because of the sort of, I don't know, tacit thought that, oh, you know, maybe somebody else will do it. So are there contextual factors or certain kinds of problems for which individuals seem to make better decisions and those for which groups make better decisions? And is that better characterized where you think, okay, actually, you know, an individual might approach this better than a group, or other contextual factors for the types of problems that groups would confront where groups can be led astray? So if the group feels like it's under threat, or the group can't, you know, is ambiguous as to whether or not other group members have their best interest at heart, things like that. So when we think about modeling out how a democratic process could be led astray to ultimately, you know, tilt towards autocracy, for instance, where you kind of are electing to undermine your own nature as a stakeholder in that process. So that seems like a worthy sort of way of also kind of exploring or contextualizing this topic.
I think you should do a PhD in crowd intelligence, because you ask all these beautiful questions, and these are all active areas of investigation. I don't think that we have a general universal law of where it works, where it doesn't work. I think the only universal I see is that for any task that you might be considering, whether it's a moral task, which is sort of on the side of the universe of what we can attack here, because there's no ultimate ground truth, right? But the only universal I see is that collective intelligence does not emerge as a natural phenomenon. It emerges when you create the conditions for it to emerge. So if you can figure out a way to attack or to organize the incentives for the people on the street to actually go and forget about the diffusion of responsibility and actually go help that person that's on the street that they would have helped if they were by themselves. But they don't, because they are not by themselves. So perhaps you could consider a situation where it's not the same if you're in the street on Toronto among your fellow Canadians, and something happens on the street, and you're in your group of Canadians, then there would be this diffusion of responsibility where you wouldn't feel like, why would I? I'm just like the other Canadians around you. So why would I go and when the others don't? Maybe they know something I don't, right? But think about the ethnic diversity thing we saw, right? Perhaps if you were in Japan, and you would be among the Japanese, right? Who would look different from you, and you wouldn't feel like you're one of them, and you would see something on the street that disturbs you, you probably would be more likely to intervene or to inquire about it than you would than if you were Japanese. Right? So maybe because you would think more independently, you wouldn't rely so much on what other people think because they are unlike you in this case. So if you organize the groups in different ways with different kinds of incentives you can think through to create the artificial conditions necessary for everyone to think independently and express their diversity for the group, then you will create more collective intelligence. I think that's the only basic rule.
Thank you so much, Dr. Servan-Schreiber, for your excellent and compelling presentation on collective intelligence, how diversity makes everyone smarter. Thank you to everyone for your participation, your very thoughtful questions.